So my focus, what I'm hoping to do with this campaign is really focus in on the fact that there are a lot of people that are not feeling like the economy is working for them. They feel like the economy is rigged in a way that benefits those who are already at the very top, and everyone else feels the struggles and is feeling like they're not getting ahead. And I want to change that, and so that's why I'm making really clear policy decisions to invest in people. So I want to close tax loopholes and end offshore tax havens and ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so we can invest in people by expanding healthcare to include pharmacare for all, a Dentacare program to cover 4.3 million Canadians who can't afford Medicare or can't afford their dental services, and then tackle the climate crisis in a way that invests in people, creates jobs, and does our part to reduce our emissions. So that's what I want to do, and I'm confident that people can make better choices and get better results, and those results are ones that will put people at the heart of what we do and improve their lives and improve the services that they need. And that's really what we're focused on doing, hearing people's stories, what people are struggling with, and then providing a real solution to those concerns they have.
You unveiled something on the green agenda you called the East-West Green Corridor.
Yes.
What is that?
So it's something that's been talked about a lot in the past. A lot of experts in the field of how we can reduce emissions and get better access to low emissions, zero emissions, energy, affordable energy, and distribute that and have that connected across Canada is to develop east-west connectivity between provinces that have a lot of renewable clean energy like BC and Manitoba with provinces that don't, like Saskatchewan, or if you look at the Maritimes and Atlantic provinces where they don't have that connectivity, we can bring the clean energy, the renewable energy to those provinces. And what we're proposing to do is to develop a climate bank, publicly funded, seed money of about $3 billion to allow that investment to be made to connect provinces and to provide opportunities to distribute energy across Canada east-west.
What would be the big projects and the big ticket items in that $3 billion bank?
So the bank's purpose is twofold. One is the bold kind of goal of connecting energy east-west with the renewable energy, electricity that I was speaking of. The other goal is similar to other initiatives in other jurisdictions. It's a climate bank would be a publicly funded bank that would give entrepreneurs and businesses an opportunity to have access to capital who want to expand their business. So I met with a lot of companies in Canada that are in the business of reducing emissions and creating things like electric cars or windmills or solar panels, and they say we don't need subsidies, but what we do need is sometimes access to capital that allows us to grow our business. And so this would be a response to what we've heard from a lot of the businesses that want to expand and grow and continue to be leaders in this field, which we know is in more and more the future of where energy is headed and where technologies are going to be competitive, and we want to be at the forefront, and that's where we want to make investments.
So something like the Site C Dam in BC, that's a project that you would support that would feed into something like this?
So our projects would be interprovincial energy projects, right. So connecting BC's hydro network with provinces that need access to energy. So Alberta still has other sources of electricity which are higher carbon output. So we would be able to connect BC's grid with this project, with this proposal to connect BC's energy with Alberta, for example, Manitoba's with Saskatchewan, or with Ontario that still needs more electricity. So connecting the grid and making those investments for provinces that want to have access to clean energy, we could encourage that, incentivize that with this funding and with other incentives.
On the topic of energy, can you make clear to British Columbians your position on LNG? The LNG Canada project, the $40 billion infrastructure project? Yeah, so
I want to end fossil fuel subsidies because I want to invest in clean energy for the future. That's my goal.
Okay, but what's your position on LNG? You support the project or you don't support the project?
So it's a project that I don't want to give away fossil fuel subsidies to corporations, and I certainly don't want to give billions of dollars in penalties to corporations that are in the fossil fuel sector. What I want to do is, moving forward, make sure we're investing in clean energy. We're not subsidizing the fossil fuel sector. So that's my current position moving forward, is we've got to make sure we are not investing in public dollars going towards fossil fuel.
So the only way this project could go ahead was if there were some tax breaks that the government provided in British Columbia in order to make this happen. And future projects also would require those same kinds of tax breaks, because the Premier, at least in BC, says the net benefit is huge. Give $1 million here, make $100 million there. But you're saying you wouldn't support that. You don't support that kind of investment.
So I support the BC government having one of the boldest, if not the boldest, climate action plans in North America. I support their initiatives and the fact that all of their projects fit within their plan, and I support that. What I want to do at the federal level is make sure we're certainly not giving billions of dollars away in penalties. So I don't want to jeopardize us in any way to be in a breach of a contract. But what I want to do is make sure that moving forward, we're not spending any of our public dollars on fossil fuel subsidies, and we're investing in clean, renewable energy.
What would you do with our pipeline that we own?
Right. So, I mean, I wouldn't have bought it in the first place. I've been pretty clear about that. I certainly don't believe in expanding it.
So the existing one, you just would be business as usual?
Well, I'd have to look at, what is the asset that we have, what is its valuation, what can be done with it, and I don't know those details because I'm not privy to them. But it's certainly not something I can tell. I can tell you what I certainly wouldn't do is expand it, and with its current state, I need to know more about it. And being in government, I'd be able to figure that out.
Polling does show that Canadians by a 2-to-1 margin support construction of the new pipeline, and even in BC it's close to 2-to-1 at 55 to 30%. Why are you out of step with the majority of Canadians on this issue?
On this pipeline, there's a couple of criteria that I think have been missed. One is the risk to the coastline and the thousands of jobs that could be put in jeopardy with a diluted bitumen oil spill. The increased tanker traffic and the environmental risks were not properly assessed, and there isn't a real cleanup strategy in place. No one knows how to clean it up. The Indigenous community concerns have still not been addressed, and that's an ongoing concern. And I'm concerned with projects that are just about exporting and not creating jobs long-term sustainably in Canada. And so the idea of just shipping raw resources without any value add is the wrong way to go to develop an economy. We've seen that here in BC with raw logs being shipped and the loss of a lot of jobs. Any developed economy is one where you add value, and the raw exportation is not an economy that I think is useful for Canada.
Do you want to empower provinces more to take positions on power projects or other projects that now would perhaps be seen in the national interest, but you want to empower provinces to have a greater voice, is that right?
Yeah, I'd love to clarify that. So we have federal powers, and I would maintain those federal powers. What I would do differently is I wouldn't impose projects like a pipeline. I wouldn't impose those. The reason being is we know that past tradition of imposing pipelines just doesn't work. What happens is if you don't have communities on board, and if you haven't built a collaborative approach and you haven't built the consensus, the projects get held up in court, they get challenged, they get fought, and you don't build anything. And so what I'm proposing with my way forward is we've got to do things differently. The federal powers will remain, but I would use them differently and not impose a project like a pipeline. What I would do is work with provinces to make sure we're on the same page, we create incentives, and then we can move ahead.
How is that not a veto?
So the veto, so what I'm proposing is not at all that. I'm proposing that the powers remain with the federal government. The Constitution remains unchanged. It's just an approach. And the approach is, I'm practical. I want to get things done. And if the current way hasn't worked, why continue doing it? We've seen the current approach has been mired in problems, court challenges, delays. It's unpredictable. It's bad for business. Business wants to know that you can make an investment and you get an outcome. When things are uncertain, when things don't go ahead, it makes it difficult to make investments. I don't think that's a good way to go ahead. And so I wouldn't impose projects like a pipeline. What I would do is work with provinces, work with communities collaboratively, and develop a consensus before going ahead.
But they can still say
no. What I want to do something different. And so communities that don't want something are going to say no, and they're going to fight it in court. And so I believe the way for us to build something, if our goal is to build something, if our goal is just to be rhetorical and say I'm going to do this and just going to fight with people, the goal is actually to build things that are useful for Canadians. It has to be done in a way where people are on side.
But we're a fractious family, and we're spread over a vast continent. So how can you always have consensus or agreement? And wouldn't you be ceding federal powers if you didn't have a vision that you could implement after listening?
Well, the difference is that I'm not changing the federal powers, and I'm not suggesting that in any way. I'm not suggesting changing the Constitution. What I'm suggesting is, if you look at the past and look at how governments have approached Indigenous communities, how they've approached provinces, it has not been constructive, and it hasn't resulted in positive steps forward. It's created conflict and tension, so clearly the past has not worked. So I want to do things differently.
You and Mr. Trudeau find yourself in the same region today.
Go figure.
Has he reached out to you? I know he wanted to connect, to give you a personal apology. Has he reached out to you?
Yeah, so his office has reached out, and I made it clear that I would be open to a conversation as long as I was not being used as a checklist or a part of a PR exercise to try to be exonerated.
So you have not talked to him yet?
No, but I've reached out and explained my position, and their offices said that they accept that, and we're waiting for it to happen now.
Do you expect it to happen today, given that you're both here?
This trip.
Yeah, so last I heard it's going to happen soon.
Okay.
It's going to be face-to-face or phone.
Phone calls, what I understand.
And there's some conditions that you put on that?
It's just not, it's a private conversation, and I don't want to be used as a tool in some sort of process to seek to get an apology through me as proxy for Canadians who were harmed by what he did.
Will you be discussing it afterwards?
No, I want to be clear that the conversation itself will be private, but what I say publicly is that he did things that made people feel that hurt people, and I want to connect the behavior that we're seeing in private and the contrast with that and what he says in public. So in public, he says things that show that he might have an interest in solving people's problems. Maybe he's concerned about the cost of medication, but he meets with the pharmaceutical industry in private and the big pharma as well as the big insurance companies in private over 875 times, and then abandons commitments to drop the cost of medication. So that in public versus in private, the question of who is the real Mr. Trudeau is a legitimate question that those incidents, the blackface and brownface, certainly give more evidence of.
What did you think of Elizabeth May's forgiving of Greg Malone for his blackface skit that he did on CBC? Was that the same thing?
It's Ms. May's decision between her and her candidates. I've really been focused on what it says to Canadians and what the impact is on people who've gone through challenges, whether it's systemic discrimination, whether it's being made fun of, whether it's barriers people have faced because of who they are, and I think that's where the focus should be. And also it should inform the decision that Canadians make about who the Prime Minister should be. If there is a pattern of behavior that shows a lack of respect and care for what people are going through, and that's reflected in policy decisions, I think it's fair for Canadians to ask the question, who is the real Mr. Trudeau, and what does that say about people's concerns and them not being addressed?
You don't find it uncomfortable that it happened with another party, albeit not their leader?
I think it's uncomfortable that people are making light of what is a really hard thing for a lot of people. A lot of Canadians live with memories of and continuing ongoing barriers because of the color of their skin. It means they're stopped more by the police, or it means that they don't advance in their careers, or they've been assaulted or insulted. It's tough for a lot of people.
Affordable housing, which is, as you know, in this region,
Yes.
is a huge issue in your own riding and elsewhere. The Liberals have promised 100,000 affordable housing units over the next 10 years. You've promised 500,000 over the same period of time. How are you going to do that?
It's a matter of choices and priorities. And I just look at the priorities that governments in the past have had. When they want to give billions away to the wealthiest corporations, they do it right away. They write checks and they send billions of dollars. And I've seen that in Ontario, where billions of dollars went to GM and went to Caterpillar, and both those companies shut their factories and laid off workers only to open up in other jurisdictions. So Conservatives and Liberals give billions of dollars to the wealthiest corporations right away, but they ask Canadians who are struggling with housing to wait, or they tell them that their concerns don't matter, or they say it matters, but then they don't actually do anything about it. And with Mr. Trudeau's commitment, we had the the Parliamentary Budget Office look at his commitments, and it turns out he's actually spent, and he's spending 19% less than Mr. Harper did as a percentage of GDP. So it's a very shallow and empty promise. I'm committing to boldly invest in housing. And what I want to do is a number of things. One is work directly with cooperatives, not-for-profit agencies, provinces and municipalities to provide federal funding, which has not really been there for the past 30 years to build affordable housing. I also want to create incentives for private development of affordable housing by waiving the GST on builds where there's an affordable build. That's a part of a significant part of the mandate. And we also want to help first-time homebuyers with some measures to help them out as well.
So where does that money come from?
So, I mean, with all things, it's really just a matter of choices and also revenue. So the contrast I can draw is last year, just in 1 year of the Liberal government, you could find similar examples with the Conservative governments, but in 1 year, Mr. Trudeau, in the fall economic statement, wrote a check for $14 billion to the wealthiest corporations in the fall economic statement that gave the wealthiest corporations the ability to buy corporate jets and limousines. That was a $14 billion check. $4.5 billion for a pipeline. He also waived or forgave corporate loans to the tune of $6 billion. So we're almost at $25 billion of spending last year that each one of those commitments went to the wealthiest corporations, the people at the top. Instead, I would not do that, and my spending would be on people. So things like pharmacare, dental care, and building housing.
So would that come exclusively from corporations, or would people be paying more taxes?
Well, I would not be spending the money that's been spent right now on corporations, so I wouldn't spend it that way. And I would ask the wealthiest to pay a bit more. So there's a couple of things we'd do. We'd ask corporations to pay a little bit more. We'd put in place a super wealth tax, which is a tax on those who've got fortunes of over $20 million. And the PBO has costed that out and announced that would be a revenue of about $70 billion over a period of time. So a pretty significant revenue source. We also targeted the amount very specifically as a 1% tax on wealth over 20 million. And the reason why we chose 1% is we found, the PBO helped us find that would make it more expensive to shift the money out of the jurisdiction, out of Canada, than it would be to keep it. So it's a tax that would actually be very effective. We'd also close things like offshore tax havens, which there's clear ways for us to close, CEO stock option loopholes, and increase revenue that way.
You mentioned the Parliamentary Budget Office and their independent assessments. You've submitted 3 things so far for assessment. The Liberals have submitted 0, and the Tories have submitted a dozen. Like, are we going to see more from you as we go forward? More submissions to the PBO?
Yeah, it's a new process. I think it's really exciting, and we're taking advantage of it and using that service. And we'll see more announcements that use that new service.
Will your housing plan be submitted?
We're going to roll out certain announcements, and I want to hold those back so that I can give you those exciting announcements when they happen.
Okay, but I mean, there is a cost associated with supporting the construction of 500,000 affordable. Absolutely,
units. Big. It's going to be it's a significant, bold cost.
And so that will be, but you'll give that to the PBO and let them.
Yeah, my plan is to. Yeah, my plan is to let people know what my priorities are and where I want to spend money. And I'm proud to show people that I want to spend a lot when it comes to affordable housing.
We've had that debate here about what constitutes affordable housing.
Yes.
When you look at 500,000 units, how do you kind of parse that number? I mean, in broad strokes.
Yes.
Who are you looking at here? How much is rental? How much is owned? How much is modular housing or whatever? Right.
Our focus is on rental housing, making sure that there's an affordable rental option, co-op options, non-market options. We know that in jurisdictions where housing is affordable, there's a healthy rental market where people know that they can live somewhere and not have the uncertainty of being rent evicted or being pushed out. So we want to have a strong, healthy rental market. And affordability can't be what we're seeing, where people are spending half of their salary on the place to live. So we want to look at 30% to 25% as an indicator. This would be we'd also build out in our plan not just young professionals and young families and graduates from school, but also lower income folks, people who need assisted living, seniors. So our plan will be a comprehensive plan to roll out housing that meets the needs of all Canadians.
The situation with China and Ming Wanzhou and the extradition are making big news in Vancouver on an ongoing basis. So what's your position there on that and the incarceration of the 2 Michael Spavor and Beck? Where are you standing?
Well, first off, the extradition hearings have now just begun in earnest. The biggest concern I have is we've got Canadians that are in China that are in really horrible conditions. Reports that we read detained in facilities with light that's maintained on for long periods of time. Very distressing conditions for both those Canadian citizens. So our first priority has to be the safe return and the safety and well-being of those Canadian citizens. That's got to be our priority. Those are Canadians that we've got to take care of. When it comes to our approach to the extradition, it's got to be rule of law. There's no appearance of bias or interference of any sort. It's got to be a just and fair process, which Canadian law is known for. That has to be the way it's done. And with respect to China, there's been incoherent and inconsistent approach to China and Chinese foreign policy. We've had, over the past year and a half, 2 years, Mr. Trudeau as Prime Minister saying one thing and then the ambassador to China saying other things. And that was a problem that created, I think, some of the inconsistent policy. And then there was a gap time where we didn't have an ambassador to China. I think that was also a mistake.
What would be your approach to interacting with China?
Well, this is a significant global player, and we need to make sure we are not having inconsistent messages. We have to take it very seriously, be very clear and consistent and coherent with what our approach is. I think it's important to call out human rights violations in China, and so we can't shy away from that. But there has to be consistency, and there has to be a serious approach taken. I think that's been lacking over the past 2 years.
Have you any concerns about undue influence in domestic affairs by People's Republic of China here in Canada?
Well, there was recent reports from Canadian intelligence that cited concerns about interference from China and from India. And those reports we should take very seriously. We've had some briefings. Our office has been briefed on those concerns. And all Canadians expect that our election and our democratic process should be free from interference, particularly free from foreign interference. And that's very appropriate to be a concern that Canadians have. I'm also concerned, and we're going to do our best to monitor the situation and respond as we're advised by the intelligence services.
Do you ever face that situation yourself? I mean, you're in a riding and in a region with a large Asian population. Do you ever find yourself in that situation?
I can't point to a specific incident myself, but I take the evidence that's been raised by the security forces of Canada or the intelligence services of Canada very seriously. So it's something I'm going to be diligent about and follow their recommendations.
When was the last time you talked to John Horgan?
Oh, I spoke to him a couple months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not since the campaign began. Have you or anyone on your team sought his endorsement during the campaign?
Our teams are in constant communication, and we work very closely with all New Democrats across Canada, and so we're excited by that support that we get.
But him specifically, have you asked for him to come out and speak on your behalf or to endorse you?
I haven't asked for that specifically, but
No.
I'm not sure exact details of the conversations my team has had with his team. But
Okay.
I've received great support from his office and from his on the political side from the New Democrats in BC. So I'm happy with that support.
Will he be out campaigning with you at any point?
Well, I've been asked for that, but I know that I've got his support, and I got the support of BC NDP, and it's very helpful.
Okay. Are there any of the MLAs, were they out campaigning with you this week?
Yes, yeah, I've a great team in Burnaby that are out really regularly supporting, and I'm honored to have their support.
Okay.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Horgan?
Good, yeah, great relationship. He's a good guy. He's doing a lot of great things. I actually point to Mr. Horgan often, saying that, look, this is what you get. If you vote for New Democrat, you get a premier who follows through on commitments and delivers things that he promises and makes sure that people's lives improve. And I hear all the time from people when I'm in my riding, the childcare program, the pilot project, how much that's lifted burden and weight off of families. There's a project in my riding in Burnaby South that's significantly just transformed the lives of people. Like I've met young women who tell me that this has literally changed their life, and now they can go to work and they're confident that their kids are in safe, quality places, and it's made a world of difference. And that's what I'm inspired by, and that's what I want people to know. That's what you get with the New Democrat.
Of course, it's a minority government in BC, so you've seen sort of firsthand how that works.
Right.
Have you given thought to what that might look like at the federal level and whether it would be workable?
Yes, I'm open to working with other parties. I've made it clear. As Prime Minister, I would work with other parties that want to help implement universal pharmacare for all or our dental care program. I'm excited about any opportunity to build programs that lift people up, and if someone wants to work with me to do that, I'm happy to have their support.
So if you were not in the driver's seat, per se, in a minority government, what would be the sort of core pillars that you would have to get buy-in from to support someone?
I appreciate your question, and I don't want to avoid it, but I have to let you know I'm running to become Prime Minister, so I can't entertain a hypothetical where I'm not, but I can still answer the question by saying, as Prime Minister, I would work with parties with the criteria of probably the following criteria. For me, the focus has to be on responding to a couple of key areas where people are telling me that they're most stressed out about or most worried about. Healthcare is a top thing, and so that would be the pharmacare plan and the dental care plan. Those are two really bold initiatives that would help out people in a massive way, and we can deliver them within 1 year. Then I would say housing is another top priority, and we need to see some action on housing. And then climate crisis, real commitments to tackle the climate crisis. Those would be three really top priorities. Alongside those, reconciliation would always be something that works throughout everything we do, as well as there's a handful of others, but those would be the top priorities.
You mentioned electric cars in your opening address. We pay far and away the highest gas prices in the country. How do we get away from both heavy taxation in those prices in this region, but also maybe getting away from the reliance on fossil fuels?
Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting area where if we make some good policy decisions, we could come away with two really big results. One is encouraging and making it easier for Canadians to make that choice. So there's a $5,000 incentive right now. One of the flaws of that incentive was it initially didn't apply to the one car that was actually made in Canada, which is the Chrysler Pacifica in Windsor. So we fought hard and pushed to say, listen, this is a car that's right now exempt from this incentive. It should be included. It's now included. So looking at that as a policy point, we thought we want to encourage people to buy electric cars, but we also want to support Canadian manufacturing. So what we're proposing in our Power to Change, our environmental or our climate action plan, is moving from $5,000 to a $15,000 incentive, which is a pretty significant incentive. But with one caveat, the $15,000 would only apply to made in Canada vehicles. So I could see if you're a manufacturer of an electric car and you know that there's a massive incentive in Canada, but the car should be made in Canada. We're close to America, so it gives us a proximity that's competitive and that's advantageous. But it also gives the market that's ready and willing that people would buy given this massive incentive. And we know once the incentive hits $15,000, it is very persuasive as an incentive. So this would create an opportunity for people to have cars that are electric and so get off of fossil fuel reliance. And the technology has gotten to the point that with that incentive, electric cars, especially in climates like BC, are phenomenal. Even in harsh winters, more and more evidence is showing that the electric car technology now is more than sufficient to be able to last in harsh winters. But in BC particularly, we could have all the needs in terms of distance and travel and battery life that would allow for this to be a real viable option for a lot of Canadians with that incentive.
Isn't that a $15,000 handout to auto manufacturers and the government handout? And you've just talked about wanting to do away with government handouts that's all this is effectively. It's called an incentive, but really it's being passed on to the auto manufacturers.
Well, there's two things that make it different. One is that it fits with our goal to reduce emissions, so it's connected to a goal. The second thing is tied to creating jobs in Canada, because the incentive wouldn't be a blanket. If it was just a $15,000 incentive, then you'd be right, I think. But we're saying it's a $15,000 incentive that could only be accessed if the vehicle was made in Canada. So we're tying it to job creation in Canada, so work for Canadians, as well as emissions reduction. So that's why I think it's a very good policy decision.
You've talked about electrifying transit fleets
Yes.
across the country by 2030.
Yes.
Okay, again, that's only 10 years away. It seems like a long time. But when you look at the life cycle of a bus,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of new transit buses all over the country, how do you accomplish that in 10 years without scrapping a bunch of perfectly good vehicles?
It's a bold initiative, I know that, and it's a bold goal. I think we need to be bold, given how serious climate crisis is and given how serious the impact has been on people here in BC. one of the things that I think of when I make these type of decisions, when my team comes together, I think about a woman I met in Burnaby when I was campaigning, and she told me that climate crisis was her biggest concern. And she had a baby in her arms, and I asked her, why are you so concerned? And she said, well, I'm worried about my baby. And I assumed that she meant the world that her baby would grow up to. And she said, I am worried about the future, but not the distant future. I'm worried about the following summer. And I'm worried that on some days in the summer, given the extreme forest fires we've seen, that we've been told not to go outside on some days because it's dangerous to breathe the air. It's hurtful and harmful. And I'm worried about my baby breathing the air. And that to me really captured the urgency and what we owe to the next generation, to our kids, and we owe it to our grandkids. And so I think we've got to be bold. The other side of that is we can make investments to electrify transportation that are going to create jobs in Canada. We also know that there's some of the best producers of electric trains and buses are also in Canada. New Flyer is a company in Winnipeg that is one of the leaders in electric buses. So we would create opportunities to put Canadians in the position to be able to work and in jobs that would create good employment opportunities, but also reduce our emissions. It's bold, but I'm confident we can do it if we put money behind it and put the right incentives in place. It is ambitious, but it's possible.
You also want to make transit free. I don't know what it's like in other regions, but in this region, 1/3 of the money that goes to pay for transit in Metro Vancouver comes from the fare box, and 1/3 comes from taxes, and 1/3 comes from other. So, and there still never seems to be enough money to pay for the expansion of service that everybody is clamoring for. So where is this money going to come from if everything is free?
So my commitment is this, that if a municipality chooses that as a priority, I want to make sure that it's attainable. So it's for municipalities that choose, yes, this is a priority. So Victoria recently has passed a motion in their city council that that's something that they want. And then I would work with them to achieve it. If Vancouver chose, I would also work with Vancouver to do it. So I'm putting it on the table as this is something I'm willing to do, but it may not be the right fix for a certain city or municipality. They might rather want to have an investment in infrastructure. They might rather want to see expansion in services or building a new massive project that might be better in line with their strategic goal to expand public transit. So I would work with cities that say, this is our goal, this is our priority, this is what we want. And if they want free transit, again, it's just a matter of choices. There's a limited resource that we have. I understand that. I take the budget very seriously, but it's where we spend that. If we spend that into public transit, we know that there's a massive return on that investment. It reduces emissions, it creates a higher quality of service, and it gets people moving around and improves their quality of life. So I believe in it, and I would make the limited resources I have at my disposal, I would use them in a way that's responsible and invest where people think where they need it. And that would be free transit for a municipality that chooses.
But how much would that cost the federal taxpayer?
So it would be
free transit in Metro Vancouver, hundreds of millions of dollars.
It would be a significant investment. Again, I give you an example with the dental care program, just to give you a costed out example. That program is $856 million. So it's costly, but it would cover 4.3 million Canadians that right now have no coverage at all. And
isn't it $1.8 billion the first year?
That's right. That's right.
Take it up, and then it's $800 million.
That's right.
After that.
That's right. That's correct. So there would be a bump up in the first year because there's a lot of people that have put it off. So it would bump up and it would stabilize at 856. You're absolutely right. That program, if you can put that up with the cost that I told you, the decisions that Mr. Trudeau made, for example. On one hand, he spent $26 billion that all went to the wealthiest corporations. This program would cost less than $1 billion. So it would be paid over 25 times by the expenses that we just saw last year. But again, we're not considering the revenue that I'm looking at. A moderate increase in corporate tax rates, a new super wealth tax, closing tax loopholes like the offshore tax haven, which the PBO indicates would be $23 billion of revenue. There's a lot of revenue that we're missing out on. There's about $10 billion of leakage where we're owed money from corporations, but because the CRA is not staffed up enough and not following through enough, we're not getting that revenue that we're owed. This is not additional taxes, just what we're actually owed. So there's a lot that we could do if we make it right, if we make it a priority and make it the right choice.
You mentioned balancing budgets. In 2015, the NDP promised to run balanced budgets every year, and there's been no such commitment this time around.
That's
Why?
correct. A couple of things. One, I don't know the exact details of what Mr. Trudeau has done and what's going on with our current revenues and our exact commitment. So I need to know more details before I can make any commitment around that. What I can commit to is this, that I will not be giving billions to billionaires. I will not be giving massive amounts of monies to the wealthy. What I would do instead is invest in people. I've committed to a significant revenue increase to pay for services, and I commit to being very serious about our budget and taking it seriously. I wouldn't run deficits to give billions away to the wealthiest corporations, as Liberals and Conservatives have done. Both have done that with massive tax cuts under Mr. Harper that ran deficits, giving billions to literally the wealthiest. And Mr. Trudeau has done the same. He hasn't invested significantly in programs for people, but he has certainly given billions away to the wealthiest. So I would do things differently.
So you're not philosophically opposed to running a deficit?
No, not at all. I think that people expect us to use our budget very responsibly, and I believe in that. And it's the type of deficits. I would not run a deficit to just give tax giveaways that Mr. Trudeau did recently. Like I mentioned, the $14 billion in the fall economic statement, I wouldn't do that. But if it's an investment in people, things like pharmacare, I would be open to making those investments. But again, I'm talking about some significant revenues, and those revenues will be able to pay for our investments.
What are your thoughts on...
That's good. I'm turning to this side of the room now.
What are your thoughts on anti-speculation tax for foreign buyers? We have one in BC. What are your thoughts about that on the national level? Yeah, it's one of our commitments. So on housing, I should have mentioned that when the housing question came up, but what I want to do is tackle some of the root causes of the kind of skyrocketing prices. So two things I want to put in place. One is take the speculation tax, the foreign buyers tax in BC, that idea, and implement it nationwide. The second thing I want to do is tackle money laundering. And we know in BC, at a minimum, it's contributing to at least 5% of the increase in property prices. So it's driving up the cost of housing. But that's what we know. It could be a lot more. That's only the amount that's been uncovered. And some of the reports indicate there's a lot that's not been uncovered. And it could be even worse as we head east. So I would invest the resources to make sure that's tackled. I asked a question actually in Parliament when I was elected to Mr. Trudeau that there's a money laundering division at the federal level, but no one in that division is actually working on money laundering. And I said, that is outlandish, that we've got a department and a budget for money laundering, but no one's actually tackling the problem. And he didn't respond to the question, but we know that it's not been a priority. There's a budget, there's an office, but it's not been given the mandate or the resources to do the job that it needs to do. I would make sure that we clamp down on money laundering as well as foreign buying, and to ensure that housing is sustainable and people can actually find a place to live.
Would you go as far as launching a national inquiry into money laundering?
Yeah, that's something. I believe it's something very important, and I would certainly do that. I think that this is a nationwide concern, and there's clear evidence that it's driving up the cost of housing. We need to clamp down on it, and I would certainly commit to that as well.
You'd cooperate with Mr. Horgan's inquiry?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we should work with that. And that inquiry, that was a great decision that Mr. Horgan took, Premier Horgan, to get at something that's been rumored of and people knew of anecdotally, but now we've got some evidence that it's really significant and we need to put an end to it.
This region has been hit pretty hard. I think fairly across the country has, but here in particular on the opioid crisis. You have thoughts on that and how you tackle some of those issues?
Yes, I do. Addiction kind of hits pretty close to home. I shared my personal story of my father's addiction, and I know that loss and how much that hurts. And I lost a lot of years, I think. My dad lost a lot of years of his life where he was struggling with that addiction. And as a lawyer, I worked with a lot of clients that were charged with personal possession, and they were just addicted. If I can be really blunt, they were faced with addiction, but instead of getting the services and help they need, they got criminalized. So my approach would be the problem of the opioid crisis and addiction is linked to addiction, mental health, and poverty, and none of those things are a criminal justice problem. They're all a healthcare problem or a social justice problem. And I would respond with compassion and care, make sure people get access to rehabilitation. When we talked about our healthcare expansion, we also believe it should be head to toe, and it should include rehab services and mental health services. So I think that's the solution. If we really want to respond to the crisis, that's what we need to do. And I think about, imagine if there was any other illness a virus that there was an outbreak in Canada where thousands of Canadians died because of it, there would be immediate response. There would be mobile stations set up everywhere, and we respond to it with an urgency. But this is also, similarly, there's an illness, and that's resulting in thousands of people dying, thousands of Canadians dying, and it hasn't been declared a public health emergency. So I would also declare a public health emergency, which would free up some funds to go directly to frontline care providers. I'd also switch our approach from a criminal justice approach to a healthcare response. And I think that's the right way to go.
So what is the role of the federal government in that, sort of, in terms of funding something like that? When it comes to addiction services, these typically are provincial responsibilities.
So it's a part of our, I would roll in, my ultimate goal is to roll in a head-to-toe health coverage into the Canada Health Act. That it should have, the initial Royal Commission in 1963 rolled out a host of other measures that should have been included. One of those was pharmacare, and that hasn't been done. And so I would complete what the Royal Commission said, decades ago, and say pharmacare has to be included in it. But also there's a number of other gaps. Dental care, it makes no sense that our teeth aren't covered. We know that dental health and overall health are definitely connected, and you can get open heart surgery, but you can't get your teeth fixed if you have a health issue with your teeth. Similarly, addiction services and mental health services should be a part of a complete and comprehensive healthcare system. So I would use the resources and finances we have and the leverage of the Canada Health Act to include a comprehensive head-to-toe healthcare coverage. You had a follow-up as well?
Well, Kennedy Stewart put a resolution to the UBCM last week calling on the federal government to declare a public health emergency, but also to allow for exemptions to the Drug Act so that doctors in the downtown east side could prescribe a heroin substitute. Would you push for those exemptions as well? Would you listen to what the cities are saying?
Yeah, so on the public health emergency, absolutely. That would be something we would declare right away. New Democratic government, first 100 days, this is a priority, we would do that. In terms of the exemption, really the question is, what are we willing to do to save lives? If there is a policy that we know will work, it will save lives, and it would help people be healthier, deal with addiction, and improve their quality of life, we should look at those policies and not be afraid to take a courageous decision that would save someone's life.
Last election, legalization of marijuana was a big issue. It's come and gone, and people will, out here, there's been questions about the supply and that it perhaps wasn't the windfall that people thought it would be. Would you change anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mistakes in its rollout, but a lot of those mistakes, the burden has already kind of been felt by municipalities and cities. I would have liked to see the federal government put in place more work up front so that cities and provinces didn't have to scramble last minute. But with a lot of the implementation, it's moving ahead. One of the things I would certainly do that Mr. Trudeau hasn't done is for simple possession offenses, now that it's legalized, and we know that there's been a historic injustice where more or disproportionately far more Indigenous, Black, and people of color were stopped and arrested and charged with a personal possession. That historic injustice continues to preclude people from certain work, from traveling, from education, and certain opportunities. I would push for a automatic expungement of those records. So not a pardon, but a record deletion. And I think that's something very concrete that I would do differently.
Different topic. So Canada is the only OECD country without a breakfast program to feed hungry children. The U.S. spends billions every year on that. And your platform talks about a national school nutrition program. What does that look like, and what's the budget for something like that, and how many kids, and how do you measure success with that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's a program that we've put into our commitments, but we haven't rolled out all the details, and I'm hoping to roll some of them out. I wanted to put out our commitments well ahead of time, so we rolled them out in June, but we've kept back some of the details. So there's some details that we're going to roll out. But the idea would be, we know that health is determined by a host of different factors, and one of those is nutrition. Access to a good place to live, ability to exercise, and to be active. So for young people, we know that the impact of not having access to good food has a long-term impact. If someone doesn't eat well when they're younger, it's going to result in worse outcomes as they get older. So this I look at as an investment, and investment in our youth is one of the best investments we can make. And you're right to point out that these type of programs exist in the States. They could be improved in the States, but we don't have something at all. And so it's something that I consider very important. Tied in with this is I also want to work on connecting local producers, local food with communities that want to access that local food. And often it's expensive and hard to buy, but they want to. And so I want to incentivize local food. I think that would tie in with this food strategy in the sense of if we can get people access to healthy local foods and make it easier to access, people often choose the easier option. If it's easier to have access to healthy food, people will do it. It also has an impact on the environment. It's less of a footprint if you can eat locally grown food. And it's got a great health outcome. If people are able to eat good food, they're going to be healthier. So this is something I really believe in. I think it's so vital that we have access to good, healthy food, and particularly for young people. So we'll roll out more details, but it's a commitment and it's going to cost, but it's something that's important to spend on.
Okay, and it'll be a national program.
Yes, we want to develop a national strategy for both, for a nutritional program for school kids, but also a national program for local food.
I want to ask you about something that, for me, is an elephant in the room, because
Yes.
I heard you in conversation a couple of years ago
Yes.
on As It Happens with, I
Okay.
think it was Carol Off,
Mhm.
and you were talking about Calistan,
Mhm.
and we've had incidents of violence or attempted violence, certainly in British Columbia, but nationally too, and internationally. You were asked if you rejected violence in all of its forms, and you would not say, yes, I reject violence in all its forms, no matter what the goal at the end is.
No, not at all. I always.
did not hear you say,
Okay.
I played that interview over
No,
and
I
over
rejected.
again.
I rejected unequivocally.
And you kept saying it's a complex issue. It's a complex issue.
No. It's I reject violence. I mean, I just look at my life. I can tell you that I'm a lawyer, so I use the legal system to advance justice for people and for my clients and for communities that were struggling, poverty groups, immigrant and refugee groups that I work with. So I use the legal system in my life, and I'm a democratically elected official since 2011. So I've used the democratic system. So for me, my life has been using the legal system and using the democratic system to challenge injustice and unfairness. So that's what I believe in. And I wrote a book called Loving Courage. My life is about having the courage to love oneself and to love others, and to work towards building a better world with compassion and care. And that's what I believe in.
So when you look at the struggle that some people have, where they do espouse those values, you reject that?
Yeah, I've always used my platform to say what I've done in my life is to use community building, democratic options, legal options to challenge injustice. And that's what I've advocated for, and that's what I believe in.
Press on a bit, because
Yeah,
you
press away.
did say you used your fists at some point.
Yes.
Right, to fight some of the racial discrimination you face.
That's right.
personally. So how do you, I guess, square that sort of violence sometimes, or?
I was a kid, and I'm not proud of it, but yeah, I had to defend myself.
Can I ask about proportional representation? The
Mhm.
NDP's policy, I believe, is to replace the first past the post system, if elected, without a referendum.
Correct.
Until a couple of months. As you know, well, what would you say to the 61% of British Columbians who rejected proportional representation in a referendum not too many months ago, that you're going to force on some people without a referendum?
I think there's a very clear consensus that people across Canada think that the first past the post system that results in, at the federal level particularly, results in very unfair majorities where a party gets far less than half the vote. So consistently in Canada, parties have gotten less than 40% of the vote but get 100% of the power. So federally, that makes no sense. It denies many people their voice. So I made it really clear I absolutely believe in a mixed member proportional system. There's a consensus that the first past the post system has been unjust federally, and I would bring that in immediately and without a referendum. That's correct.
If you're so confident that people would vote for it, why wouldn't you hold a referendum?
I think
So it's such a big decision as that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that people need to see it, and I want to remedy the situation where people vote not in terms of their values or what they want, but they vote out of fear. People feel like their vote is not being reflected. There's a lot of cynicism. And this is a concrete way where we've got lots of evidence that there is increased voter turnout, there's increased civic engagement, there are better outcomes in government when we've got proportionality across the world. The committee that went around Canada that heard from thousands of people, that was a committee that spent time studying this issue in Canada, came out with an overwhelming consensus that people wanted proportional representation federally. That was a federal committee, and that is a strong basis for me to say, given that the committee found proportional representation, it was a federal committee, that this is the way to go.
So even the vote in BC, the overwhelming rejection in BC after a long, hard-fought campaign where proportional was endorsed by a popular premier in Mr. Horgan, still went down almost 2-1. That doesn't give you pause.
No, there's different realities provincially. This was a federal study that was done, and the federal study was very clear.
It's the same voters.
But there's different realities. Maybe in certain provinces there's not much of a concern about the false majorities. Maybe it's less of a concern. I don't know what describes the reason for it, but I know that the federal study found overwhelmingly that people wanted the proportional system, so I would do it.
We also had a citizens' assembly a few years back, so it wasn't just this one time.
Sure.
Like we've been
Three
down
votes.
this rabbit hole twice, right?
Yeah.
And again and again. And you say it's fear and cynicism, but isn't that a little unfair to the intelligence of British Columbians who actually went through these long campaigns of really education, and there were very articulate points of view, all sides.
Yeah.
Still rejected it.
For the federal level, I know that the federal committee had that finding, and that informs me as a federal representative, and I'm confident that this is the right way to go.
And you're not concerned about, because one of the concerns some people raised was the rise of the alt-right in some of the countries in Europe and how they got a foothold in parliaments and in some cases controlled parliaments.
No, I think that giving proportionality will prevent false majorities and give power to people and create collaborative opportunities, and I think that's going to result in better outcomes.
Sorry if you already answered this. Did
Yeah.
you say what system you preferred?
Yes, I didn't think I said it very clearly, but I
Mixed member
did.
proportional.
Okay, good. Yeah, mixed member proportional.
That's the other hornet's nest, is trying to explain to people how the different systems work.
It's true. It's true.
Trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And graphics.
Yes.
Can we ask a little bit about you touched a bit on jobs around clean energy, but
Yes.
what is your job creation strategy, kind of writ large, broad brush? Like what does success look like for you?
So to look at success, you kind of look at the contrast to see what hasn't worked. And what hasn't worked are blank check approaches. So giving billions of dollars without any strings attached or without any conditions to the wealthiest corporations, hoping that they're going to create jobs, has not worked. We look at the years where Mr. Harper put in place a number of essentially blank check corporate tax giveaways or billions of dollars given away to corporations, and it didn't create jobs. And we see real evidence of it. I grew up with that evidence in southwestern Ontario, where companies took billions of dollars and despite taking that and despite being profitable, still closed down their factories and shipped the business somewhere else. So for me, it's got to be tied to job creation. Any investment that we make has to be tied to job creation. So one of the best ways to spend public dollars, I believe, is in public infrastructure. So when we build homes, that's creating jobs in communities to build the homes, but it's also creating homes for people. So there's a double benefit. When we invest in retrofitting buildings, and one of my plans to reduce emissions, we know that one of the three largest contributors to the greenhouse gases are buildings, and that means homes and larger commercial buildings. Maybe not this building because it's LEED Gold, I think I saw on the way in, so this building might be all right. But a lot of buildings are massive contributors of emissions. So what we would do is it would create opportunities for work if we retrofit all homes and buildings in Canada. This would be in fact, I can give a little compliment to Mr. Harper that he put in place a retrofit program that actually was effective, but it was short term and it didn't allow for businesses to scale up. I put in place a long-term plan to retrofit all homes and buildings, which would allow businesses the predictability of a program that would be long-lasting, and they can predict and they can scale up their businesses because of this opportunity. this would put people to work in every community, because a retrofit would happen in rural communities as much as would happen in urban communities. So it's a job creation plan that would create jobs everywhere. It can't be outsourced because the retrofits have to happen in a community. It's going to be in each building and home where new insulation or new solar panels or better windows are installed to reduce the emissions. So that's kind of the example of what I believe in terms of job creation. Public infrastructure investments, retrofits, where we're creating incentives that put work, that creates jobs in communities, not a hope of a chance of jobs being created, but a concrete dollar goes in, investments go in, and jobs are the result.
What's so bad wrong with the economy right now? We've got record low, like over the last versus say 4 decades, record low unemployment. You know, they've been setting records some months in terms of the number of jobs created. So what's wrong with what are you trying to fix?
It's a great question, because it's so true that the numbers show one thing. There's one story being told by the numbers, that the economy is doing well. When you dig a little deeper, the question is, who is the economy doing well for? It is certainly doing well for the people at the very top. There is massive wealth that's being concentrated into fewer hands. There's no question about it. People at the very top are enjoying massive success. But if you ask everyday Canadians, working class Canadians, are they better off? There was a survey that was in fact conducted, and it found that half of Canadians are just $200 away from not being able to pay their bills. So they're just on the edge. And it also plays out in terms of other areas. If we go beyond, that $200 a month, the specifics around that are people can't afford medication. There is millions of Canadians that can't afford the medication that they need, and they make choices. I've met these people, and they're seniors, and there's working class people, even young professionals. I met a woman who is a graduate, a master's graduate, has got a great job. She got late onset type 1 diabetes, so she was very healthy and fit and got diabetes late on type 1, so it's genetic. It happened late in life. She didn't expect it would ever happen, and she spends thousands of dollars a year on her medication. And she's got a good job, but the medication costs so much that she is struggling. I've met people who can't get the dental care they need, and I met a woman who lost her teeth because she couldn't get dental care, and now she talks with her hand over her mouth. She's shy and she's embarrassed, and she's like, I don't want a handout. I just want to have my teeth fixed so I can work and so I can go out in public. And she's embarrassed. There's real struggles that people are facing. Even though the economy is doing well, it's not doing well for them, and they don't feel the benefit in their lives. And I feel like we've got to build an economy that works better for people, for all people, not just those at the top.
We're going to have to head out soon.
Oh, I was having a good time though. Okay. Is that our time? Yeah.
Quickly, Canada's largest trading partner is, of course, the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
We saw changes to the NAFTA deal, some suggestion that Canada was believed in that. How do you think the Liberal government handled it, and how would you handle the U.S. in this current state? They
handled the NAFTA agreement really poorly. I can say for certain that is, as hard as it is to deal with Mr. Trump, I think two things. One, Mr. Trudeau didn't call out Mr. Trump on basic things where countries around the world were saying it is wrong that kids are being stripped from their arms of their parents. That is something that is despicable and should have been called out. And then the NAFTA agreement was worse than what we had before. We had a concessionary agreement where we lost rights for farmers, for dairy farmers. Medication costs are going to go up because of the concessions. And there is no environmental or labor protections in place. So Canadian workers can compete with anyone in the world. We've got some of the best workers in the world, but they can't compete if the level playing field is not there. And Democrats in the States were working to make sure that the environmental and labor regulations were actually enforceable, but without them being enforceable, it creates a situation where jobs are going to be lost in Canada to a jurisdiction that does not have the same labor rights and the same environmental protections. Canada cannot compete unless there's a level playing field, and we shouldn't be having trade agreements that don't create an opportunity for Canadians to thrive.